Hello again and welcome back to the channel. Today we are making an Italian classic Spezzatino. This is a simple beef stew. I'm going to be working out in the yard a little bit later, and there's nothing better when you come inside. Weather's changing, obviously the weather's getting colder. Come in, dinner's done, it's on the table. Fantastic. So when we have a little bit of extra time around the house and we're going to be home doing other things, I like to get dinner in the oven, and that way when it comes out, we're ready to go, we're ready to sit down and eat as a family. And so what we're going to make today, Spezzatino from, this is a bottom blade. I got a couple here, bottom blade shoulder roasts. These are from the shoulder of the cow. And from the bottom of the shoulder blade, these are fantastic for pot roasts and stewing applications. As you can see, they have a lot of fat between the muscles. They have a lot of, actually flecks of fat in the muscle. And that's really what you want. That fat is going to melt down. It's going to keep the meat moist. It's going to be incredibly tender. And this quantity of meat, this is about 5.5 pounds of meat between the two roasts. This will easily feed 10 people. Now, important to note, when this is fully cooked, this will shrink down. There's going to be some of the liquid that comes out of the meat and actually flavors the sauce, but this will shrink down in terms of physical size. So what I'm going to do here, rather than just stew these big pieces of meat, I'm going to break this down a little bit. Now, they do come with a little piece of butcher's twine here that's holding the whole thing together. I'm just going to remove that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down into, I'd say likely maybe 4 or 5 pieces. So just want to cut that down. There's nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing more attractive than having, one nice big piece of meat that's sitting on the plate when I'm having a stew. So you know what, we're just gonna, let's see, work with the shape of the meat here. There we are. It's another nice piece. And we'll break this down into 3. There we are. One of these. And one of these. There we are. So these are about equal. I'm going to break down the other one as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cook these in batches because I don't want to crowd the pan. What I want to do is just flour the meat, sear the meat, develop a nice crust on the outside. All the sugars and the juices from the meat will caramelize, and that's just going to be flavor for our braising liquid. You can't fake that. And certainly you will notice when it's missing. And so what we're going to do is simply give this just a little bit of salt and pepper. We want to make sure we season this well on all 4 sides. Are. And we'll get a little bit of freshly cracked black pepper as well. There we are. Now, not to worry that we're getting a bunch of this all over the board. We will mop this up with the meat as well. So we're just going to get the heat under our pan. Now I'm just going to move this around a little bit. I want to keep one hand clean, just in the event that I need to grab something else here in my kitchen. But while I'm seasoning my meat, we want to make sure we season, again, all 4 sides, roll it around the board, make sure we pick up all of that seasoning, because that is all good flavor. All right, so we are ready to go. Our pan is heating up. We're just going to get a little bit of olive oil in there just to coat the bottom of the pan, probably 4 or 5 tablespoons. And this is what we're going to use to sear our meat. Now before we put it in the pan, all I want to do is dredge this in a little bit of all-purpose flour. The seasoning is on the meat, and so I haven't put any additional seasoning in my flour. I don't think we need it. There we are. So we want to make sure we don't have any excess. We just have a very thin coating of flour along the outside of our beef. And like I said, this is a critical step when we're stewing meat. We want to make sure we get that beautiful crust on the outside of each piece, and we want to make sure that we sear all sides in the pan. This does 2 things. It gives us a beautiful crust that's incredibly flavorful on the outside of our meat, but it also develops a bit of a fond on the bottom of the pan where the meat juices crystallize, and the flour that's on the meat will actually allow the stewing liquid, I should say, to thicken as it cooks. So our oil is heating up. I can feel that. And we've got our meat here ready to go. So like I said, I don't want to crowd the pan. I want to make sure I give these guys enough space, there we are, to do their thing. And I think 5 pieces here should be perfect. There we are. There we are. 1 layer. Perfect. I'm going to let these go for about 3 or 4 minutes per side. I'm going to flip them once I've given them about 3 or 4 minutes, and then once they're done, I'm going to let these rest, get my second roast in the pan. So I will see you in about 20 minutes. And we are back. We are just taking the last of our meat out of our pan here. And this is exactly what we're looking for. There we are. Just going to put this on a plate. So I'm going to shut the heat off for a sec. Now this is what we're looking for. And yes, this makes a difference. This beautiful brown color on the meat, this gives us a ton of flavor. You would certainly miss this if this wasn't there. So yes, a little bit more work, but the work is worth it. And so what we have here, I'm just going to show you quickly, at the bottom of the pot, we have these beautiful brown bits, and this is what that caramelization gives you. This is all flavor, and we want to make sure that we don't lose any of that. So just to start, we have a little bit of fat at the bottom of the pan. I'd say probably we have maybe 1 or 2 tablespoons. So what we're going to do is make just a very light roux to help us thicken our gravy. So I'm going to turn the heat back onto medium heat. The meat was seared on a medium-high heat. We want to make sure that we don't burn any of the bits at the bottom of the pan, and certainly we don't burn our meat. So I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of the flour that I used to coat the meat. I want to have roughly equal parts flour and fat, as that's what's going to make my roux. There we are. And all the roux is a thickening agent that's going to thicken my stew. So I'm just going to take a little whisk. I'm going to whisk this around. I don't want any lumps here, so all I want to do is get my flour and my fat incorporated. And I want to cook some of that raw flour taste out of the flour, so that when I'm eating my end product, all I'm tasting is that depth of flavor. I'm not tasting any raw flour. So I'm not looking to get a whole lot of color on this. I just want to cook this through for about maybe 45 seconds to a minute. There we are. And now we're going to start to deglaze the pan. Just going to wash off my hand for a sec. All right. So what I'm going to do here first is I have 1 liter. This is 4 cups of a good quality beef stock. I'm going to start with this and get a little bit of that into my pot first. Go back in there with my whisk and make sure that we whisk any lumps out of that roux. We want a completely smooth consistency. There we are. Oh, perfect. There we are. So now I'm just going to add the rest of my stock as I'm whisking. There we are. All right. And the last of my stock. Perfect. So this is the beginning of our braising liquid. Now there are a couple of other things that I'm going to add in here. So this is a good quality organic beef stock, no salt added. This is one that I purchased. And so I want to be able to control the salt content in my dish. So I'm just going to give this maybe just a quick pinch of salt. Now, in addition to that, I'm going to add a jar of my homemade tomatoes. There we are. All right. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to put this into a bowl so I can take out the herbs that I have in this jar as well. Just easier to take them out now than later. So what I have here is a stalk of celery, and this is what I put in at the time that I canned these tomatoes. I've got a little bit of basil. There we are. These have all done their job to flavor my tomatoes. There we are. And I think we are done. So what I'm going to do is add all of this to our pot as well, and make sure that we scrape that down. This is really what separates a traditional beef stew from a Spezzatino. Usually there is the presence of some kind of tomato product in there. And certainly if you don't have tomatoes that you've jarred yourself, a good quality jar of passata from a good supermarket will do the trick. What I'm going to do as well, I have a half a bottle of red wine here. This is a Valpolicella. I'm just going to pour this in my jar just to rinse it out, because we don't want to waste any of that goodness. So we'll give this a shake, and I will put this right into, there we are. And that is our braising liquid. So we're almost there. A couple of other things I want to do. Just going to give this a quick stir. There we are. So I can feel that everything that was on the bottom of the pot is now lifted up. There's absolutely none of those little brown bits left, which is exactly what I want. I want all of that to dissolve into my stewing liquid. And now there's only two other things that I'm going to do. So first step is I'm going to put my meat back in. Let's get this stuff off here. There we are. I want to get all of my meat now into the pot. Even though this is beautifully seared on the outside, the meat is still completely red, raw, and cold on the inside. So we're going to get everybody back into the pool. There we are. We want to make sure that our meat is, if not fully submerged, certainly mostly submerged. Work it down there. A couple of smaller pieces here as well. Now, there's all of these resting juices on the plate. We don't want to throw that away. That is all flavor. So we want to make sure that not only do we get those into the pot, we scrape them down. This is what's going to give our stew that depth of flavor that we are looking for. There we are. All right, now only one thing left to do, and that is to focus on our flavorings. So I've got here a piece of cheesecloth. While I'm waiting for my stew to get up to the simmer, I have a number of herbs and spices that I want to put into our pot. So first things first, we have a bunch of parsley. I was out in the garden again, and we had a little warm spell, so the parsley came back. We're just going to throw that right in the middle of our cheesecloth here. I'm going to break it down a little bit. We want to make sure that it stays contained. I've got here a couple of sprigs of fresh sage. I'm just going to break those up, put them in with our parsley. I've got one sprig fresh rosemary. I've got a little bunch of fresh thyme, and this is going to add some fantastic flavor to our stew. Now, we do have a couple of other secret ingredients. First and foremost, we have a little bit of garlic. I'm just going to add these cloves. I got 3 cloves of garlic. I'm just going to add these in whole. I'm not going to crush them at all. I want that gentle flavor of the garlic to cook out. And I have 4 of my rinds of the Parmigiano Reggiano. This, whenever I cut my cheese and I have the leftover rinds, I put them in a zip top bag, put them in the freezer. And this is one of those secret ingredients that makes authentic Italian food tastes like what it is. So we've got a lot in here in our cheesecloth. I've got some dry herbs here as well. I've got some bay leaves, just 4 bay leaves, and then I've got a tablespoon each of whole peppercorns and whole allspice berries. Now the allspice is not traditional, but I do like the flavor that it gives, and so my kitchen, my rules. So I'm just going to add this in here as well. I'm going to tie this up, throw it into my pot, and put my pot into a low oven, 350 degrees, uncovered, for 2.5 hours. Once that's done, I'll be out in the yard doing what I need to do, and when I come back, we will finish this up with our vegetables and get dinner on the table. So I will wrap this up, throw it in, 2.5 hours at 350. I will see you in about 2.5 hours. We are back. It has been about 2.5 hours. I just took our pot out of the oven. This has been going for about 2.5 hours in a low oven, about 350 degrees, completely uncovered, as I do want my stew to reduce and the flavors to intensify. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to take out our little flavor packet here, our bouquet garni. And I just want to make sure that I get all of the liquid out of there. I want to keep all of that for our stew. All right. So my meat has started to develop a bit of a crust on the top side that was just above the level of the liquid. All I've done is I flipped my meat over because I want, again, all of those caramelized juices to dissolve into my braising liquid. So I'm going to take my bouquet garni out. This has done its job. This, if you recall, had all of the herbs, the parsley, the thyme, the rosemary, the sage, the garlic, the peppercorns, the parmesan rinds, the allspice berries, the bay leaves, and all of those flavors have infused directly into our braising liquid. So now, for the last hour of cooking, we're going to put in our vegetables. A stew is nothing without vegetables. We need to make sure that we get a balance between our meat and our veg. And so now we're going to add all of our vegetables. So what I have here to start, I have two white onions. Normally I would put whole shallots in here. I'd simply peel them and throw them in whole. I don't have any shallots in the fridge, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 of these white onions, and all I'm going to do is very roughly, I'm just going to cut them into 6 pieces. There we are. And I'm angling my cuts, so what I get looks like a little wedge, equal wedges, 6 equal wedges. I'm going to take these and I'm going to throw them right into my stew. Take my second onion, and again, I'm going to cut down at an angle. I'm going to cut down at an angle. Same thing on my second half. And as you will see throughout the last hour of cooking, all the layers of the onions will start to separate. And so we'll get these beautiful, soft and sweet layers of onion in our stew. And that will add a good bit of sweetness and some fantastic vegetable content. We've got some mushrooms here as well. These are some large, cremini mushrooms. You can use white button mushrooms, chestnut mushrooms, cremini mushrooms. All I do with these, very simply, cut them in 4. I want my vegetables to be chunky, which is going to give my stew a good bit of texture and a good bit of character. So all I'm going to do is cut these into 4 pieces. There we are. Now you'll notice with our stew, our meat has gotten a little bit smaller. It's shrunken in the liquid, but it has released its water and its liquid to flavoring the actual stewing liquid as well. So that's to be expected. But the flavor, I think, has been very much augmented from where we started. So here we have all of our mushrooms. This is a good bit of mushroom here. We're just going to throw these into our stew as well. There we are. Now, I also have some celery. This is 8 ribs of celery. And what I'm going to do, I've washed these, I've cleaned these thoroughly. I'm going to cut these into about 1.5 inches, kind of bite-sized pieces. There we are. And I'm going to take these and throw these into my stew as well. All right. And lastly, I've got about 2 pounds of baby carrots. Now, if I had larger carrots, I would simply give them a wash, give them a peel, kind of cut them up. But I have these little baby carrots in the fridge, so I've just simply given them a wash. And I'm going to throw these right into my stew as well. Now, this is a much more balanced dish. in terms of the vegetable content and the meat. The pot's still hot from coming out of the oven, so make sure we get a handle on that and a towel on that. I'm just going to stir this up. Now the meat is very tender at this point. By the time this comes out of the oven, after 3.5 hours of cooking, this is going to be fall apart, melt in your mouth tender. So I'm not going to do anything to the seasoning at this point. What I want to do is get this back into the oven for another hour. I want the vegetables to cook in this beautiful, rich stewing liquid. But before I do, there's only one thing that I'm going to add. Now, as we cook things in the oven for a long period of time, the flavors tend to get muted. They tend to soften, and they tend to get a little bit flat. So what I want to do is brighten those back up. So what I'm going to add here is about 4.5 ounces of a sweet red vermouth. This is just going to create a good bit of brightness in that stew. It's going to add a little bit of sweetness, and it's going to add a little bit of character. Just kind of wake up all the flavors that have kind of been muted over the last 2.5 hours of cooking. Let's see if I can scrape some of those beautiful bits off the side of my pan. I'm just going to throw and make sure that all of our vegetables are pretty well submerged here. I'm not going to do anything else relative to seasoning. I'm going to test for salt and pepper right at the end. But I just want to make sure that all of these are submerged in liquid as we put this back in for the last hour of cooking. Now we do have a little bit of the resting juices here on our plate. We want to make sure we get those into the pot. Absolutely nothing wasted. There we are. And our bouquet garni will cool before we throw that out. I'm going to put this back into the oven, again, completely uncovered, for another hour. And then it's dinner time. So I will see you in about 60 minutes time. All right, we are down to the home stretch. Our stew is about 20 to 30 minutes away from being ready, and so we're going to prepare our rice. Now you'll notice I didn't put any potatoes into that stew because we are going to serve this on a bed of rice, and not just rice, but mushroom scented rice on top of that. So if I was just serving this as it was, I would have put some potatoes in there as well, just to kind of bulk it up a little bit and to give us a little bit of that starch content that every good stew has. But because we're going to put this on a bed of rice, I didn't put any potatoes in there because I don't want double starch. Now, you could put this on a bed of absolutely anything. You could put this on a bed of egg noodles, buttered egg noodles. You could put this on a bed of polenta, on a bed of mashed potato. Very, very versatile recipe. But what we're going to do today is we're going to prepare just a very, very quick mushroom rice in our rice cooker, and then we'll be ready to go. So I've got my skillet here just waiting, not on the heat quite yet. I'm going to cut up a few vegetables just to saute up before I put everything in my rice cooker. And so what we have here to start is just one white onion. And what I'm going to do here, again, is just cut this up, kind of medium dice, nothing too fancy. And then I'll cut the other half of this onion as well. I've got 1 clove of garlic, I've got a couple of chilies, and I've got about 8 good size cremini mushrooms. These are the same mushrooms that we have in our stew, and so we're just going to echo that flavor of mushrooms to our rice as well. Now this recipe is great as a bed for seafood as well, not just stewed items, but really it adds a little something extra. Rather than simply having a little bit of steamed rice, this gives it much more flavor, much more dimension. I think it adds a lot to the dish. So as usual, we'll just take our garlic, give it a crush, and cut that up. There we are. And then we'll get our chilies in there, nice and fine. There we are. We got our stem end. I'll just put that on our plate here. All right. So now we will get some oil in the pan. Get our pan on the heat here. We will get a little bit of extra virgin olive oil in the pan. Probably, I'd say a good 4 or 5 tablespoons. And what we want to do is really cook these vegetables down. We want to evaporate a lot of the water in the mushrooms, in the onions, and we want to concentrate the flavor so that when they do go into the rice, they flavor the rice a much more concentrated flavor. There we are. So all I'm doing here is I'm using my finger to guide my knife. So as it's going, I curl my first finger in so that I'm not going to cut the tip of my finger off. And as I cut, I simply move my finger across. Once I get about halfway through, I can simply put that on the large flat end. There we are. So we're just going to cut these up quickly while our pan is on the heat. And what I have in the bowl of my rice cooker there is 4 cups of basmati rice that I have rinsed thoroughly. And what I mean by that is I rinse it 3 times, dump the water. What I want is for the water to run clear. And that way I know that all the surface starch is washed away. And what I have in the bowl of my rice cooker will be beautifully fluffy and separate grains of rice. There we are. So we've got just a couple of these mushrooms left. Now this looks like a lot by volume. This will cook down. It will cook down quite a bit. There we are. All right. So I will take all of this and put it right into my olive oil. Oh, there we are. That's the sound I like to hear. Now I suppose I could have used a bigger pan. That's okay. There we are. All of this will cook down in due course. I'm going to give this a little bit of salt and pepper just to let the water leach out and concentrate the flavor of our vegetables here. There we are. So I will give this a quick stir. I'm going to allow this to cook down for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll be ready to add this to our rice. So I will see you in about 10 minutes. All right, so our mushrooms and onions mixture has cooked down. In the bowl of my rice cooker, I have my 4 cups of rice that I've rinsed thoroughly. I have about 1 liter of chicken stock in here, good organic chicken stock. I've given that just a little pinch of salt because, again, no salt added to the one that I purchased. And now these mushrooms and onions and garlic and chilies, these are just about done. These have cooked down. They've intensified in flavor. They're starting to get a little bit of color. And now what I'm going to do is just take everything that's in this pan and throw it right in with my rice. And all of this is going to flavor my rice as it cooks. And what we're going to get at the end is going to be an absolutely stellar product. There we are. So we will just mix this around. Oh, the smell of this is absolutely spectacular. So I'm going to throw this into my rice cooker. This will be ready to go in about 25 minutes. And at that point, we're going right to the plate. So I will see you in about 25. All right, our rice is done. Our stew is done. We're going right to the plate. So all I did, haven't adjusted for seasoning yet. All I did was I skimmed a little bit of the fat that had melted off the meat and settled on the surface. We don't want a big grease slick on our stew, so I skimmed that off. So about 1.5 cups of fat that I skimmed off, and I'll wait for that to cool. I'll discard that later. And now for the rice. Good rice facial. All right. Let us start just by mixing this around. This looks absolutely spectacular. Love it. All right. We'll just get some of that beautiful mushroom rice at the bottom of our plate. There we are. All right, now, before we add our stew, we're just going to test this for seasoning. That's not bad. That's very close. So I'm just going to add just a little bit of salt, and that's it. The rest of the flavorings are pretty well spot on. Now look at this. The meat is beautifully tender. Our vegetables have softened. Our gravy has thickened up. Oh, this looks absolutely fantastic. So I'm just going to take one nice big piece of meat, put this off to the side, go in there, get a collection of our vegetables, some of our celery, some mushrooms, some of our onion, put that in there as well. There we are. There we are, nice wedge of onion. And then we will get in there and get some of that gorgeous gravy. And that, maybe a little bit on the rice as well. Now that is a dish. The test of a stew. No knife necessary. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna look at that. The meat just flakes away beautifully. Look at that. Oh, make sure we just toss this. We'll just toss this right in our gravy with some of that rice. Oh. That is so tender, no teeth necessary. It just melts in your mouth, literally, like butter. That rice is beautifully flavored with the mushrooms. You know what? We'll try our vegetables here as well. Get one of these onions. There's nothing more to say. Absolutely fantastic. Rich, beefy. You got to try this. I mean, this is soul food that will warm you from the inside out on a day like today. Working out in the yard, weather's starting to change. This is the kind of thing that you want to come in and have for dinner. And just because it took a couple hours to cook, don't worry about that. This is food that takes care of itself. It doesn't need you hovering over it. Anytime you can throw something like this in the oven, I'm telling you, you will be rewarded when you put a plate of this on the table. Do like and subscribe. Do share the content as it's meant to be shared. And this is Coach Joe saying, I hope you try this, and I will see you on the next one.